بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So today is our sixth lesson, lesson number 6, on the explanation of the work of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, al-Uboodiyyah, which is servitude to Allah Azza wa Jal. And in the previous lesson, the basic points that we went through was we returned to the definition of al-ibadah. Shaykh al-Islam spoke once more about the meaning of the word al-abd and al-ibadah. And he spoke about the linguistic definition and how, in accordance with the linguistic definition, then everybody is an abd of Allah. Everybody is a slave or a servant of Allah, because al-abd means al-mu'abbad, which is a path, tariqun mu'abbad, a path which has been walked over frequently, and so it becomes subdued and depressed in the ground. So in a similar manner, all of the creation, they are subservient, they are restricted or constricted by way of the laws that Allah has put in His creation regarding life and death and health and sickness and all of the other creational systems of cause and effect. They are bound by them. They can never ever escape from them. So therefore they are slaves of Allah in that sense, with the linguistic meaning of the word. And this then is known as the general ubudiyyah, or the general universal ubudiyyah, which encompasses everybody and everyone besides Allah Azza wa Jal. Everything that He creates is a servant to Allah, is a slave to Allah. No one escapes from this. Now, this is not a point of dispute. This has never been the point of dispute. And so, to limit Islam and to claim that Islam and to claim that Tawheed is simply to witness this reality or this truth, meaning the truth that everyone is subservient, is created, is restricted in the sense that he's subject to Allah's laws in His creation and he cannot escape them. To limit Islam and to limit Tawheed just to this is incorrect. And we see that many of the great disbelievers, such as Iblis, he acknowledged that Allah is the Lord and that Allah is the Master and Lord of every creature. Fir'aun knew inwardly that he has a Lord and Creator, but it was arrogance that made him reject the truth. The Jews in the time of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, they knew that he was indeed the Messenger of Allah. They knew him like they knew their own sons. And obviously they knew that Allah is the Lord and the Creator, the one who reveals books, the one who sends messengers, the one who gives life, takes life. All of this they affirmed, but it did not enter them into Islam. And so what we find then is that the people of the earth, as Ibn Taymiyyah explained, is that the people of the earth, we find that they, that there's various categories. And from them are those who affirm this truth, they affirm this reality about Allah's rububiyyah, but they are arrogant, so they disbelieve. And then there are those who affirm this rububiyyah, but then they act and they obey and they do some deeds of worship, but then they also worship other things besides Allah. And so this is the religion or the way of many of the people of the earth, like the pagan Arabs used to be, and likewise the Yahud and the Nasara and many others in which there is shirk. So they worship Allah and they worship other than Allah, and that's after they acknowledge Allah's rububiyyah, after they acknowledge the creational reality, right? Which is that Allah gives life, takes life, creates, and all the other actions of rububiyyah. They affirm this. They affirm there's a creator, but they do not act fully in accordance with what that necessitates. That necessitates that they worship Him alone, exclusively, and that they do not worship anything else. So this is a second category. They worship Allah and they worship other than Allah. And they give obedience, they do some of the acts of worship, like the pagan Arabs used to. They used to come and perform Hajj and perform Umrah. They used to honor the guest. They used to honor the parents, and all numerous other deeds which are required. But that did not enter them into Islam. And then there are those who are the believers who single out Allah and who worship Him alone. So the point behind all of this discussion was to illustrate that there's a very clear line between what is Iman, what is faith, and what is disbelief. What is Tawheed and what is Shirk. And therefore, who is a person of paradise and who is a person of hellfire. There's a very clear line, and that has been made very clear in the Quran. And if we do not understand this topic clearly, then it will mean that this line will become blurred. It will become ambiguous, and we will therefore not know what is the actual message the messengers came to call to, and who is a believer and who is a disbeliever, and who is a muwahhid, who is the one who singles out Allah in worship, and the one who associates partners with Him in worship. All of these issues are affected if we do not really truly understand this particular issue. So this is what Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is speaking about, and he mentioned these points in the previous lesson, and he used a term which he said al-haqiqa al-kawniyya, al-haqiqa al-kawniyya, the creational reality, And so this is what we mean when we say that that the creation has a creator, a Lord, a master, a giver of life, a taker of life, that everything that we see is subdued, it is subjected, the sun is subjected, the moon is subjected, the stars are subjected, the rain and the winds are subjected, the animals are subjected for our use. Everything, likewise, humans, they are servants and slaves of Allah, and they are all equal in this respect, right? The believer and the disbeliever, the sinful and the obedient, right? There's no difference between them in terms of the creational reality. A believer gets sick, a disbeliever gets sick. If a disbeliever tries to jump off a cliff and fly, he will fall down and die. And this is no different for a believer. There's nothing special about a believer in this respect. If a believer tries to jump off a cliff and tries to fly, well, there are laws in Allah's creation. There are rules in Allah's creation. You cannot fly like that, and you will fall and you will perish. So no, this is universal for everybody. There's no difference in this respect. And this is what we call the creational reality. The creational reality. And so this is equal for every single person. But this is not the focus of religion. This is not the focus of Islam, because no one really denied that. Iblis did not deny that. And he knew, as we mentioned numerous verses in the Quran last week, from the Quran last week. And likewise, even when the people of hellfire enter hellfire, they themselves will acknowledge that they were upon misguidance and that they have a Lord. So this now leads us to the start of today's lesson. We'll continue. That was just a quick recap of the previous lesson. And we're now going to move into an argument which is used by the Sufis. And the general idea that we are discussing is still this issue of restricting Islam to, the belief that there is only one creator, there is only one provider, there is only one sustainer, there is only one giver of life and taker of life. Right? To limit yourself, or to limit Islam to being only the creational reality, will lead you into serious mistakes. And this is what the Sufis fell into, some of the extreme Sufis. And one of the arguments that they use, which is what we are going to start with in today's lesson, is that they claim that those people who have a deep understanding and deep knowledge of Allah's creation and of Allah being the Lord and the Creator, that they have deep knowledge of this, that they are somehow exempt from the religious obligations, from the religious duties. Right? So meaning that you reach a level in your knowledge and you reach a level in your wisdom, in what you understand about Allah being the Creator and about His creation, meaning that you have deep-rooted knowledge about this. And when you reach a certain level of knowledge and wisdom, then Allah's commands no longer apply to you. They are no longer applicable to you. Right? And in a previous lesson, we explained how this is false. This is a lie against Allah's religion, because even the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was commanded in the Quran, وَاعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ. Worship your Lord up until there comes to you the certainty, which means death. Meaning keep worshipping Allah up until basically death comes to you. So this idea is false, what they claim, that there are certain people who are the awliya, who are the pious friends of Allah. They are the most righteous people, and they've reached a level in their knowledge of the creational reality that they therefore no longer have to abide by Allah's commands and His prohibitions. So on this point, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he says, وَمَنْ ظَنَّ أَنَّ الْخَضِرَ وغيره سقط عنهم الأمر لمشاهدة الإرادة ونحو ذلك كان قوله هذا من شر أقوال الكافرين بالله ورسوله. Which means that whoever claims or whoever thinks that Al-Khadir is the prophet that Musa alayhi salam, the prophet Musa alayhi salam, that he met with and whom he accompanied, whilst Khadir did a number of things that Musa alayhi salam was not able to comprehend. So they claim that Al-Khadir was a person who did not have to follow any law. He did not have to follow any prophet. He did not have to follow Musa alayhi salam. Why? Because he was a person who had such deep knowledge of the creational reality that he therefore became exempt. He therefore became exempt. So Shaykh al-Fawzan comments upon this and he says that they claim they basically claim that, or this claim that they make is something that is worse than the statement of the people of disbelief. Right? In other words, this statement that these people make when they say that if you reach a certain level of knowledge and wisdom and awareness, all of Allah's commands, obligations no longer apply to you. So basically they are abolishing Allah's religion effectively. And that this is from the greatest types of disbelief. This statement that a person makes like this, it is from the greatest types of disbelief. So regarding Al-Khadir, they use this as a, as an argument, and Al-Khadir was in fact, when we look in the Quran, we see that Allah Azza wa Jal has described Al-Khadir as an abd. Right? So when the story of Musa alayhi salam is mentioned, when he goes and he has someone with him as a companion, and they go on their journey, and then on that journey, Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, فَوَجَدَا عَبَدًا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا, that they both came across a servant among our servants, to whom we had given mercy. آتَيْنَاهُ رَحْمَةً مِنْ عِنْدِنَا وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِنْ لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا, that we had given to him mercy from ourselves, and we had given to him from ourselves knowledge which we had taught him. So this is a reference to Al-Khadir. Al-Khadir. And he was a servant of Allah from the pious, and some of the scholars have explained that he was actually a prophet himself. He was given many miracles, and this is not like what the Sufis say, because the Sufis say that he was a man who no longer had to follow any Sharia, no longer had to follow any law. He did not have to follow Musa alayhi salam, and that's why he did those things. He destroyed the ship, and he killed the child, and he rebuilt a wall, the three things that are mentioned at the end of Surah Al-Kahf, the 18th chapter. And that he didn't have to follow the law of Moses. This is what they claim. And they try to use this as an argument to show that when a person reaches a level where he understands the what did Allah intend by this? What did Allah intend by that? What does Allah intend by this event? What does Allah intend by making this person ill? What does Allah intend by making this person to die at the time that he died? And what does Allah intend by, so they claim that when a person reaches this level of knowledge where he can actually understand Allah's irada, meaning what does Allah intend by this? What does Allah desire by this? Right? And they reach this level of knowledge and wisdom about Allah's creation and what happens in it, that this person now no longer has to follow any law, no longer has to obey the commands, no longer has to keep away from the prohibitions. And this is false. This is a false argument, because first of all, Al-Khadir, he himself was a prophet of Allah Azza wa Jal. And we know that apart from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the law and the message of every single prophet was only for his people, So the message of Musa alayhi salam was for the Bani Israel, was for the children of Israel. And as for Al-Khadir, he was a prophet in his own right, and he had his own law, He followed his own law because he was a prophet. And that's why he did not have to, he did not follow the law of Musa alayhi salam. And so Al-Khadir was not commanded to follow the law of Musa alayhi salam. So this argument, therefore, that is made by trying to use the example of Al-Khadir and this story which we find in the 18th chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Kahf, this is used by many of the Sufis who believe in these extreme beliefs. This argument is false. This argument is incorrect. But from this example, you can see that when people try to limit Islam and limit Tawheed only to the creational reality, then you can fall into great misguidance, such as this particular type of misguidance. And so Ibn Taymiyyah described this misguidance. He said that this statement that these people say, that a person no longer has to follow the laws and follow the Sharia and obey Allah and His Messenger once they have acquired some deep-rooted knowledge about Allah's creation and the events of creation and what Allah intends and Allah's wisdoms and so on and so forth, that they no longer have to follow. This is, as Ibn Taymiyyah said, قَانَ قَوْلُهُ هَذَا مِنْ شَرِّ أَقْوَالِ الْكَافِرِينَ بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. That this is from the most evil of statements, from the statements of the disbelievers who disbelieve in Allah and His Messenger. And this is because Allah, whatever Allah commanded and His legislations, no one is exempt from them. No matter what his level, no matter what his rank, no one is exempt from the laws and the commands of Allah Azza wa Jal. We already mentioned from what Ibn Taymiyyah said that even the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu, he was a worshipper, he was an abd, all the way right until his death. And he was commanded to worship his Lord all the way until death. And, no one, not even a prophet, not even a messenger, has ever been given this particular station or this particular position whereby he now has reached such a level of knowledge and wisdom and awareness that now the obligations no longer apply to him. There's no messenger or no prophet ever who was given this station. Rather, we find on the contrary, the prophets and the messengers were the greatest of people in their worship. And of course, the greatest of them is the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as is explained here by Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan. He says that he used to pray, he used to fast, he used to strive in Allah's path, he used to make hajj, he used to make umrah. In fact, he used to stand in prayer at night up until his feet would become swollen because he would stand for so long, and he would worship Allah with so many acts of worship. And he never ever said, ever, that I have reached such a level that I no longer need to worship Allah Azza wa Jal in this manner anymore. So all of this is a false argument. So what is the point behind everything that we've mentioned so far? The point is that anyone who halts and stops at the creational reality, then he has not entered into Islam. Because the creational reality, meaning simply to observe that the creation has a creator and so on and so forth, this does not enter a person into Islam. Rather, all a person is observing here is the linguistic meaning of the word abd and uboodiyyah. Right? This is only the linguistic meaning, that everything is subservient to Allah, everything is created, everything works according to laws and rules. It never disobeys those laws and rules. water has a certain quality, it never disobeys the laws and rules that pertain to it, and the same with every other element or force or whatever it might be, right? This is the creational reality, and this is simply just the linguistic meaning of the word abdan ubudiyyah. So no person can enter into Islam, and no person can fulfill the purpose of creation up until he enters wholly and fully into the second meaning of al-abd and of al-ubudiyyah, which is being in servitude. And this is what we call al-haqiqah ad-diniyah, right? This is now the religious reality. This is the religious reality. The reality is that everyone is obligated to worship Allah alone. Why? Because they have a Lord, they have a Creator who provides for them and sustains for them. So therefore they must show gratitude to Him alone and worship Him alone. This is now what we call the religious reality. And so Ibn Taymiyyah says that no person becomes an abd حتى يدخل في النوع الثاني من معنى العبد، وهو العبد بمعنى العابد فيكون عابدا لله لا يعبد إلا إياه، فيطيع أمره وأمر رسله ويوالي أولياءه المؤمنين المتقين ويعادي أعداءه. Which means that this person will not have entered up until he enters into the second meaning of al-abd, which is the meaning of al-abid. Al-abid is a worshipper. You are now a worshipper. So therefore, he is a worshipper of Allah. He does not worship anyone besides Allah. He obeys the command of Allah and the command of His Messenger. And he shows allegiance and loyalty to the friends of Allah, the believers, the pious, believers, and he shows enmity to the enemies of Allah Azza wa Jal. So, in other words, contrary to what is claimed by those extremists and misguided people who say that once you observe the creational reality, you no longer need to follow the halal and follow the haram and do the obligations and keep away from the prohibitions, right? Contrary to what they say, rather we find that a person cannot be a believing servant up until he does everything which Allah has legislated, which is in his ability to do so. As Shaykh al-Fawzan explains, that a person لا يكون الإنسان عبدا مؤمنا بالله إلا إذا قام بالدين بجميع شرائعه التي يستطيعها. A person cannot be a believing servant of Allah up until he establishes the religion with all of its legislations, with everything that Allah has legislated, which he has the ability to do. So whatever is within your capability, then you must do all of those obligations. You must, adhere to all of Allah's legislations, which are in your current capacity. So when he establishes those legislations, which he's able to do, then he becomes a Muslim. He is a Muslim, in fact, and he's a worshipper of Allah. And, the person who basically knowingly and willfully keeps away from these obligations and he refuses and he disobeys, then this person cannot be a servant of Allah with the meaning of ubudiyyah, the second meaning of ubudiyyah that we are discussing, even though he is still a servant of Allah with the first meaning of ubudiyyah, meaning that he's a servant, he's a creature, he's subject to Allah's creational laws, right, to do with food and drink and life and death and illness and health and all the rest of it. He's still a servant in that respect, but he's not a servant, he's not an abid, a worshipper of Allah Azza wa Jal. Then Ibn Taymiyyah explains that this ibadah, وهذه العبادة متعلقة بإلهيته، ولهذا كان عنوان التوحيد لا إله إلا الله. So he says that this worship that we are speaking of, this is connected to Allah's right of worship, Allah's uluhiyya, Allah's ilahiyya. This worship is connected to Allah having a right to be worshipped. He deserves to be worshipped. And so this is why the greatest statement, the universal truth, and the statement that the messengers came with was the statement of La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. There is none which has the right to be worshipped except Allah alone. This is what the messengers came with. They did not come and say there is no creator except Allah alone. Right? They said there is none which deserves to be worshipped except Allah alone. This is the one who enters into Tawheed. As for the one who simply says, I believe Allah creates, I believe Allah provides, I believe Allah sustains, I believe Allah gives life, I believe Allah takes life, I do not affirm this for anybody else besides Allah, this person has still not entered into Islam. He only enters into Islam when he acknowledges Allah's sole right to be worshipped, and then he enters into that servitude, he enters into that uboodiyyah. And this leads us to, and also when he singles out Allah with worship. Because as we said, there are some people who worship Allah and then they worship others besides Allah. So such people have not entered into uboodiyyah. Even if they give something of worship to Allah, that still does not mean that they have entered into al-uboodiyyah. This is because al-uboodiyyah means that none is worshipped and none is obeyed except Allah. Right? None is worshipped except Allah. And that we do not obey except Allah and those whom He wants us to obey, such as His messengers. So the word ilah in Arabic, this is the one, or this is the being which the hearts, they are attached to him and they have love, al-hub, and likewise they have at-ta'zeem, they have veneration, and they have al-ijlal, which again is a type of veneration and magnification, and al-ikram, which again is, venerating and honoring, and likewise al-khawf, fearing, and ar-raja, which is having hope in Allah. And all of these other types of things which are from the affairs of worship, the one who deserves all of these things is al-ilah, is Allah, is the deity. And the Shaykh al-Fawzan comments upon this, and he says, this kalima la ilaha illallah, when we say la ilaha illallah, its meaning is that no one is worshipped in truth except Allah. What does this mean? No one is worshipped in truth except Allah. What it means is that although there are many things which are actually worshipped, because the people of the earth worship many things. Some people worship angels, some people worship the jinn, some people worship some of the prophets, some people worship idols, some people worship the elements, the elements like the rain and the wind and the lightning and so on and so forth. Some people worship animals. But their worship is vain. Their worship is false. It is falsehood. It is something false. It is something which does not have any basis. It is not based upon truth. Whereas when we say La ilaha illallah, this means that no one is worshipped in truth except Allah. Meaning, it is only Allah's worship that is true. As for the worship of the jinn, the angel, the prophet, the tree, the stone, this worship is false. It is only Allah's worship that is truth, and which is justified, and which is based upon truth. So this is the meaning of La ilaha illallah. This is what we are saying when we say La ilaha illallah. Only Allah's worship is the truth. Likewise, what it also means, La ilaha illallah, it also means no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah. No one deserves to be worshipped except Allah. So basically there are two meanings behind this statement. First of all, no one deserves to be worshipped. No one has the right to be worshipped. Only Allah deserves to be worshipped. And the second meaning, that only Allah's worship is truth. Every other type of worship is vain and false and futile. It has no basis. It is not warranted. It is not justified. Right? It is all false. It is false. It is false deeds. It is false. The falsehood and the vanity and the futility of such an action is, just like a man who tries to quench his thirst by pouring sand in his mouth. That action is vain. It is futile. It is false. It has no basis in reality. Right? So a man who tries to quench his thirst by shoving sand down his mouth, we say that this action is futile. It is baseless. It doesn't have any reality to it. Whereas a man who is thirsty and then he takes some water and he drinks that water, we say that his action is correct. His action is correct because his action is based upon something which is true. So in the same way, a person who worships other than Allah, his action is futile and false and it is vain. Whereas the person who worships Allah, then his action is the truth. It is justice. Right? Because why? Because Allah created him. Allah provided for him. Allah sustains him. Allah regulates all of his affairs. So therefore it is justice and truth that Allah be worshipped. Right? So this is the meaning of La ilaha illallah. It is the truth. It is justice. Likewise, to give another example, and we can give an example from the worldly sense. If you imagine that, your parents who raised you and provided for you and, raised you, and then you decide that you are going to worship a cat, or you are going to worship the lamppost outside your house as your form of gratitude, then this is foolish. This is futility. This action is vain. This action is false. Rather, to show gratitude to your parents, you must obey them, you must be kind to them, you must be benevolent to them, you must look after them in their old age. All of this is the requirement of the fact that they raised you and, fed you and looked after you and so on and so forth, right? So this is what we mean, that when a person worships other than Allah, his action is vain and false. It is futile. It is built upon futility. So the meaning of La ilaha illallah, none has the right to be worshipped except Allah alone, and the worship of no thing is truth and justice except the worship of Allah alone. So here Shaykh al-Fawzan mentions a verse in the Quran, ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْحَقِّ وَأَنَّ مَا يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِهِ هُوَ الْبَاطِلِ وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْعَلِيُّ الْكَبِيرُ. So this verse nicely summarizes our discussion. In this verse, in Surah Al-Hajj, the 22nd surah, verse number 62, Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, that is because Allah, He is the truth. ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْحَقِّ. That is because Allah is the truth. And that which they invoke besides Him, meaning that which they worship besides Him, هُوَ الْبَاطِلِ, it is falsehood. And that Allah is the one who is the most high and the great, Al-Aliyyul Kabir. So worship belongs only to Allah. When it is given to Allah alone, it is truth, it is justice, and this is the meaning of La ilaha illallah. There is no deity worthy of worship in truth except Allah the Most High, and whatever is besides Him, whatever is besides Him which is worshipped, then it is batil, it is vain, it is false. To worship that thing is vain and it is false. So, meaning that the believer and the abd is the one who enters into this statement and he abides by this statement, La ilaha illallah. And such a person, the believing servant, he is different from the one who affirms the creational reality. He affirms Allah's rububiyyah, His lordship, but he doesn't worship Him out of arrogance. Like Fir'aun, like Iblis, Satan, like Nimrod, the one who argued with Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? So these are people who affirm Allah's rububiyyah, or they inwardly they know it, but then they refuse to worship Him. That's a second category. The first category is the believing servant, al-mu'min, al-abd al-mu'min, who enters into the uboodiyyah of Allah Azza wa Jal. And the second category is the one who knows and affirms Allah's rububiyyah inwardly, but refuses to worship Allah. So this is the disbeliever. And the third one is the one who affirms Allah's rububiyyah and who worships Him, but he also worships others besides Him. So these now are the polytheists, the pagans, the mushrikun. And these people have not understood the true meaning of ilah. What do we mean by ilah? The word ilah, meaning deity or God, which is what they say in English. What is the true meaning of that al-ilah in Arabic? The true meaning of an ilah is one whom your heart loves, and one whom your heart humbles to, one whom your heart venerates, one whom your heart reveres and fears and has hope in, and so on and so forth, right? And all of these are actions which Allah loves and Allah is pleased with. All right, these are the actions that Allah is loved, that Allah loves and Allah is pleased with. So, meaning that the very meaning of the word ilah means that you worship only Allah alone. And so this means that many people, they have misunderstood the meaning of ilah, al-ilah, and they have given worship to other things besides Allah, because they have misunderstood the meaning of the word ilah. And inshallah we'll look at some of those groups later on. Like for example the Ash'aris, they have a faulty understanding of what does it mean al-ilah. Al-ilah means the one that is adored, the one that is worshipped, right, with the heart, with all of these various actions of love and hope and fear and reliance and ta'zeem, veneration, and so on and so forth. This is the meaning of al-ilah. So in other words, these things which a person does, which a servant does, these are the things which Allah loves and which Allah is pleased with. So after mentioning all of this, Shaykh al-Islam goes back and he says, as for the meaning of al-abd with the meaning of al-mu'abbad, then this is something that everybody shares in, the believer and the disbeliever. All of the people are equivalent in this meaning of the word abd. There is nothing unique or special in this meaning of the word abd, meaning the first meaning, the creational reality, al-haqiqa al-kawniyya, where everybody is a servant, everybody is a slave, right? That meaning, there's no distinction between a believer and a disbeliever. And that is something which is limited. So the Shaykh says that worshipping Allah alone is something that Allah sent His messengers with, those whom He chose, the Mustafain, those whom Allah chose and they sent this message. And then after this the Shaykh continues that he says, وبالفرق بين هذين النوعين يعرف الفرق بين الحقائق الدينية الداخلة في عبادة الله ودينه وأمره الشرعي التي يحبها ويرضاها ويوالي أهلها ويكرمهم بجنته وبين الحقائق الكونية التي يشترك فيها المؤمن والكافر والبر والفاجر التي من اكتفى بها ولم يتبع الحقائق الدينية كان من أتباع إبليس اللعين والكافرين برب العالمين. So he continues and he says that when a person knows the difference between these two types, in other words, when you know the difference between the meaning of the word abd with its linguistic meaning and the meaning of the word abd with its legislative, religious meaning, when you know the difference between these two terms and these two words, like what we've explained, then that person will know the difference between the creational reality and the religious reality. The creational reality and the religious reality. The religious reality is to worship Allah alone and is to follow His command and is to follow His command which He loves and is pleased with. And it is to show loyalty and allegiance to His believing servants and whom Allah will honor with paradise, right? And to know the distinction between that and the difference between that and between the creational reality in which everybody is equal, the believer, the disbeliever, the righteous, the sinful, all of them are equal. And anyone who claims that Islam is limited only to this and Tawheed is limited to only this, and that when a person reaches this level of acquiring this knowledge of Allah's creation and of the wisdoms in what takes place and what Allah intends by these events that take place, and that this is sufficient, then a person will only know the difference between these two by knowing the difference by knowing the distinction between the meaning of al-abd linguistically and the meaning of the word al-abd, which is from a Sharia point of view, from the religious point of view. And he says that anyone who suffices himself with the first type, then he will be from the followers of Iblis, the cursed Iblis, and he will be from the followers of those disbelievers who disbelieved in Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Right? So meaning like Fir'aun and Iblis and Nimrud, because they denied the religious reality, al-haqiqa ad-diniyya. And likewise, anyone who thinks that to worship Allah in some affairs and not other affairs, right? So he worships others besides Allah, then likewise, he too is, he is not basically someone who has established the religious reality. So what we'll do is, this actually brings us to a discussion of how the people of the earth are of three categories. There are three categories. There are those who affirm Allah's rububiyyah, they affirm the creational reality, but they do not worship Him. And so they are the disbelievers, people who are arrogant in worshipping Allah. So this would be like Fir'aun, Nimrud. It would be people like the atheists today, or in fact, many of the atheists inwardly, they know that the creation points to a creator, but it is only out of arrogance that they outwardly reject and they try to find what they claim are rational arguments. But many of them, when they study the creation of Allah and they look at, especially in the modern era, when they look at the basis of life and the basis of life which is based upon information and the genes and genetics and the digital basis of life and so on and so forth, when they look at this, they know for sure, they know for certain that there is a maker, a creator, a knower, one who is able, one who is wise. They know that there's definitely something behind this, but it is arrogance that makes them reject it outwardly. So this is one category, the people who arrogantly disdain the worship of Allah Azza wa Jal. The second category are those who acknowledge Allah's rububiyyah, but they worship Him in some things and they obey Him in some things, but they don't enter into al-uboodiyyah in the way that the messengers call to. So this would be like your Jews and the Christians and those religions which are polytheists. They believe in an overall supreme deity, and they may worship that deity, but then they worship other deities as well as a means of getting closer to the supreme deity. So they have not entered into ubudiyyah. Even though they give something of worship, they have not entered into ubudiyyah, and their worship is false and vain, and it will be rejected. And that is the second category, right? So many religions will enter into that second category. And then the third category are the people of Iman and Tawheed, those who worship Allah alone without any partners. However, these people might disobey Allah in some of the affairs. In some of His commands, in some of His prohibitions, they'll fall into sin, they'll fall into disobedience, and but this only makes their iman to be deficient. It does not expel them from the fold of Islam. So these are the three categories of people, and this now should be very clear and apparent from whatever we have discussed so far in this treatise. Right? Where do people stand in relation to al-ubudiyyah? And where do people stand in relation to the creational reality, al-haqiqa ad-diniyah? And where do they stand in relation to the religious reality, al-haqiqa ad-diniyah? So now we have a very clear understanding, because Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah has clearly explained the different categories of people and where they stand in relation to these issues. And so this then will allow us to be very, very clear as to who is a believer and who is a disbeliever, what is Iman and what is kufr, what is disbelief, what is Tawheed, what is worshipping Allah alone, and what is shirk. Right? Because the purpose behind this treatise is to make all of these affairs clear and to remove the ambiguity and the confusion and to refute the various doubts which are brought by many of those people from among the Muslims who actually went astray in this great and mighty topic. So with that, we'll conclude our lesson there for today, inshallah, and we will continue again at the same time next week, inshallah ta'ala. We'll continue taking up the discussion from where we have left off, which is basically dividing the people into three categories. So we'll end there. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.